Welcome to another episode of Sounds of Science, the podcast that keeps you informed on the latest European policies shaping the European life sciences sector. Today, we're diving into the complexities of medicine shortages, a pressing issue at both EU and national levels. Joining us are two EUCOPE experts, Sean Byrne, Senior Manager, Legal and Regulatory Affairs, and Stefano Romanelli, Senior Government Affairs Manager. Both will break down the key challenges and ongoing initiatives aimed at tackling this critical topic. We'll also explore the upcoming Critical Medicines Act, what it means for companies, the risks and opportunities it presents, and what to expect from this new legislative framework. Finally, we'll share EUCOPE's perspective on crucial topics such as stockpiling and joint procurement, providing valuable insights into the future of medicine supply in the EU. Starting with the first question, addressing medicine shortages is one of the main priorities currently under discussion at EU and national levels. Could you give us an overview of the key ongoing initiatives?
Maybe I'll start, Cécile, and perhaps I'll take a step back, if I may, from the currently ongoing initiatives. Because unfortunately, we need to think back a few years to a lovely pandemic we had in COVID. And the experience that we had around medicine shortages then, and obviously not just the race towards having a new vaccine and having it available across the board, but the policy initiatives and options that came afterwards, so things like the extended mandate of the EMA, the introduction of the Medicines Shortage Steering Group, the MSSG, the start of new digital systems like the ESMP, the Electronic Shortages Monitoring Platform, and how these tools and initiatives have already started to shape the landscape around shortages, because it's not a new issue per se. We all know the AAA that's come with the revision of the general pharmaceutical legislation, access, availability, affordability, and Stefano will cover the revised GPL elements related to shortages in a couple of minutes. But we know that shortages have been an issue in the past. These were exacerbated and demonstrated more readily or more in our face, if I can put it that way, during the COVID-19 pandemic. And since then, obviously, we've continued to deal with the issue. We've had a couple of winters back, we've had a shortage of antibiotics in Europe in certain parts and jurisdictions. So again, bringing to the fore the need to actually deal with shortages from a coordinated perspective at EU level. Now, there's been already some policy-related initiatives, mainly the structured dialogue from about 3 years back, where the institutions and industry and other stakeholders already came together to talk about shortages. Toward the end of the Belgian presidency, so last year, the year before,
it was.
Time flies. Working in healthcare policy. Towards the end of the Belgian presidency, we've seen a call for action from Belgium and 21 other signatory member states at the time, which was very powerful and, in fact, quite directly led to the start of the Critical Medicines Alliance. And obviously contained a call also for a Critical Medicines Act. And these are two large-scale policy initiatives that are currently ongoing. And where do we stand now? So let's say we plan to publish this podcast around the 5th or 6th of March. So we have been working on the Critical Medicines Alliance for about a year, since February or March of last year. We had the first public forum in April, if memory serves me well. And since then, industry, patient organizations, CSOs, the institutions and member states have been working together through working groups to develop a strategic report. And so the strategic report closed for comments through the Alliance on the 20th of February. The recommendations we'll come to in a few moments. We can discuss what's in there. I think we can go into a little bit more detail. In terms of sequencing, then, we've had a call for evidence on a Critical Medicines Pact. That closed on the 27th of February, and now we anticipate in the coming 10 days, hopefully more or less around the 11th of March, we should see a published version of the Critical Medicines Act. The Alliance Large-Scale Policy Initiative has produced many different recommendations, some of which are more favorable than others, perhaps from an industry perspective, some things like drug procurement, contingency stockpiling, others that would underpin things like the voluntary solidarity mechanism that came through the EMA's extended mandate or came post-COVID, which is good, and we look forward to seeing how the Critical Medicines Act will try to legislate on the recommendations coming from the Alliance and how they will underpin some of the necessary actions we need to take to actually restart tackling shortages at the level of the EU. Maybe I will stop there for the minute. I give the floor to Stefano, because Stefano can obviously complement what I was just saying. I'm sure I missed some things, but also gives a flavour for the revised GPL, because there are shortage-related provisions there too, which...
Yeah, thank you, Sean. Indeed, you mentioned a lot of important pieces, and I would reiterate one other piece that is not at the EU level, but each member states or most member states have their own national requirements on shortages or to avoid lack of medicines and notifications and list of critical medicines. And so this is another element that we also need to consider when we discuss this topic of medicine shortages. To some extent, the revision of the general pharmaceutical legislation that the Commission proposed in April 2023 now brings a new element, a new chapter, chapter 10 of the regulation on shortages. And I think we've discussed this a little bit in our previous podcast after the Parliament adopted their position. At the moment, we know that member states in the Council are still discussing the revision of the GPL. They are also discussing this chapter, so we don't have a final position yet. But what we have seen from the Commission proposal and what we hope we will see also when the final text will be adopted, it's an approach that avoids duplication of requirements, that tries to harmonize a little bit what is requested at the EU level and what is now requested at member states level, where we often have different elements that are requested in country or in different countries. And this can create sometimes some issues with companies, especially smaller ones, when they have to fulfill certain requirement in a certain country and then a different one in different member states. So the approach that the Commission took in the revision of the GPL can be potentially useful to avoid duplication and indeed create a better harmonization. And we saw that this was also followed in November 2023, also after the Belgian call for a critical medicines action, by a communication from the Commission on tackling shortages. And after this, we've already seen the first actions from the Commission, the Critical Medicines Alliance itself that Sean mentioned. A couple of months or 1 month after the communication, the first list of critical medicines was published by the EMA. And for the first time, the voluntary solidarity mechanism was adopted. So a few actions that do not require a proper legislative initiative have already been taken by the Commission in the past mandate and are still continuing also through the EMA in some cases, as it is for the critical medicines list. But we see the actions at the EU level that can become an opportunity to, as I said, try to avoid duplication and have a more unitary approach. That is something that sometimes has been missed so far. So we can see that also potentially on shortage prevention plans, which is one of the measures that the Commission has proposed in the revision of the GPL, that if implemented properly, so focusing only on critical medicines and creating more harmonized requirements of what a shortage prevention plan should entail, at least for centrally authorized medicines, can really reduce a lot of burdens for companies for what concern administrative requirements. And we see a few positive steps in that direction at least in the original ideas, that hopefully can be implemented through the end, and really we see elements that can really support the creation of more harmonized ecosystem to address this issue that cannot be tackled at member states level only.
Right. Well, thank you for this quite detailed overview of the situation, the state of play, if we can say. Sean, for example, what would you expect from the upcoming Critical Medicines Act, and what are the opportunities and risks that you see there?
I'm looking forward to seeing what's in the Act, I'll be honest. We've had some interesting insights, I think, in the past few weeks from institutional figures and others. We expect a toolkit, but I think Stefano hit the nail on the head. What we really want to see, and the direction that we would like the Act to take, and to tackle fragmentation, we need a harmonized approach. And there's many ways to go about that. I think we already have tools in place that we could use. For example, ESMP. The shortages monitoring platform is now up and running. It contains the right data, has the right data set, so at least it's going in the right direction. But what we don't know is whether that's the system that's going to be used, let's say, to help with monitoring and forecasting of shortages. The risk is that we introduce another system, right? And we also, on top of the ESMP, we have the shortage prevention plan, the mitigation plan that Stefano mentioned, for example. Companies have to work with all of these different processes internally. And it's not simply a case of a colleague picking up a new work stream. It can be making sure that a digital system actually works and can communicate with your internal systems, that you have the right data sets in the right formats, let alone that you have all of the right data in one place to make sure that it's compliant, that you can check it internally. And then you have to look at the guidelines that come to use the system. I mean, the experience with the ESMP has been sometimes rocky in the rollouts and in the development of the system over the past year. Colleagues are already starting to use it. For example, in the past few weeks, I've had colleagues come back to me in some focus group meetings at EUCOPE and ask, why am I using ESMP? And I still have to tick a box to notify or to declare whether or not I've had national notifications of potential shortages. And this speaks to the issue of fragmentation and lack of harmonization. No problem necessarily that national member states want to know the status of the availability of medicine. This makes perfect sense, right? And member states have to adhere to the needs of patients. But how much data do we really need to gather? And I think there's an opportunity to streamline the approach to managing shortages. I think a harmonized system would help, for example, also with the voluntary solidarity mechanism, that member states can actually understand what medicines are and are not available, what the status is for companies in near real time. And we're talking about digital systems here, perhaps not the templates, but it's a separate thing. But the risk is really that we continue to build on a system that is already causing issues for companies, particularly when they need to think at where their medicinal products are, qua different borders and moving products, if they have to react to a shortage situation in real time. And these things are complicated. But I will give the floor to Stefano, if I may, because maybe you want to cover more the elements around the stockpiling and the procurement, because those are more your forte than mine.
Before that, maybe I would mention another potential risk of this act, which I see in the timeline of publication of this act. Indeed, unlike many other legislative proposals, there is a shorter time for a call for evidence on this Critical Medicines Act, so a shorter time to input from the sides of all stakeholders, not only industry, on what should be included in this act. And also we see that it will be published within 100 days from the start of the new Commission mandate. And while we understand the urgency of acting on this topic, on shortages on critical medicines, the risk is that this is rushed. And if this is rushed, we risk not having the right proposal. So I think we should have enough time to really assess what is needed in this Critical Medicines Act, maybe take a bit longer than 100 days, do a proper impact assessment, and that analyzes different policy options and solutions, have a proper timing for stakeholders to give evidence, and then publish this act, because if we don't do this right, we will not solve shortages. And one point, and it's really also about the fact that what we hinted earlier, we need to ensure consistency between different pieces. And an act which is coming at a point where the pharmaceutical legislation is still under discussion, where the work of the Critical Medicines Alliance that should also feed into the final Critical Medicines Act, both these pieces are not being finalized yet, are not finalized yet. So we should really take a bit more time and make sure that these elements are considered a bit more before releasing an act, because otherwise we risk to create some inconsistency and fragmentation that will not help addressing this important issue. And Sean, maybe you want to add something.
I fully agree with you, Stefan. It's what we've been discussing with members. What we haven't seen in particular is colleagues will have now seen the strategic report. Let's say we hope it's published at this point. If not, let us know. But when we need to have an increase of manufacturing capabilities, when we need to deliver medicines to patients, there is an economic and social footprint that has to be accounted for. And we've seen the Commission's call for evidence on the Critical Medicines Act. It suggests that they've gathered enough evidence between, let's say, experience post-COVID, with the extended mandate, with the structured dialogue. There's been a consultancy report generated alongside the Alliance last year in preparation for the Act, but these things do not account for the economic footprint, particularly for small and mid-sized companies that are the bread and butter of dealing with a lot of these shortages and need to actually hone their own systems, whether it's manufacturing or otherwise, to deal with national requests for medicines and EU requests and systems. And this is before you start to look at the social impact of how does this system really deliver medicines out to patients and make it better. Well, really great point, Stefan.
Thanks, John. And this also reminds me another point which could become a real opportunity in the Critical Medicines Act if done properly, but otherwise can have the opposite effect, which is about recognizing the specificities of small and mid-sized companies that might not have the same resources to fulfill all administrative requirements, but also thinking of the kind of products that often these companies develop. These are often very innovative products. They can be OMPs or advanced therapies or sometimes other low-consumption medicines, which have different dynamics when we refer to shortages. They are very unlikely to suffer from shortages. We have seen that also in the past, that these are not the medicines that suffer from shortages. So it's important to recognize specificities of different kinds of products. So when we talk maybe between off-patent products and non-patent products, or these very innovative and advanced products like OMPs and ATMPs and other products, and also the specificities of these companies. If this is done, the Act can really have this nuanced approach, which is needed, and it's important to see nowadays, because we cannot put always on the same page different kind of companies.
Because the strategic report has, perhaps from a EUCOPE perspective, it's gone a little bit too far in some elements, right? We weren't particularly impressed with the need or the call for contingency stocks for low consumption medicines. We don't think that's appropriate. And there were some instances where language suggests that certain elements like the public procurement would go beyond the medicines on the list. And this is not really, we don't necessarily agree with that.
No, exactly. I think that generally the approach of focusing on the list, on the critical medicines list, is probably it's the right approach, because we have seen so far a recognition on the list of products that have been suffering from shortages or with some issues in supply in the last years. And it's important to focus on these active ingredients that really can create problems, because this is where we need to focus. We should not instead focus on products where the risk is non-existent or it's very, very small due to the characteristics of the products. And as we have seen also in the current list of critical medicines, most of these APIs are for generics. And this is also where it's important to act, because if we want to solve the issue, we need to, first of all, help or support the manufacturers of products that suffer from shortages instead of adding more burdens where there is no need. And when we talk about contingency stockpiling generally for OMPs or innovative products, it's something that is not beneficial, even more if this is done for products that are not in the critical medicines list because they are not critical medicines or because they are very unlikely to produce any shortage. We just create more burden both for the marketing authorization holders, but also potentially for national authorities, which at the end will not benefit anyone. And also when we ask for contingency stocks of medicines which have a short shelf life, it's something that is really counterproductive, because you really risk to stock products that you will never use and just throw in the bin for something that at the end it's for a risk that does not exist in the end. So we really need this nuanced approach where we consider these specificities and peculiarities. And also generally, when we talk also about the different APIs, it's important to recognize, and this maybe it's also more of an education that all the community needs to do, to when you have a shortage of a product where there is no alternative option, or in many cases where maybe a specific product is having some supply disruption, but you have often an equivalent product that you can use and deliver to the patients or to the people who need it, because this is also often the case, as it has been flagged several times by the EU authorities, including the EMA.
Right. Well, thank you both, Stefano and Sean, for this very detailed overview of the situation. If you had one word or one sentence to conclude this podcast, what would it be, Stefano?
Thanks, Cécile. My word would be competitiveness, and it would be in two-way competitiveness. One, it's to ensure that we increase production and manufacturing of APIs and medicines in the EU, so that also we reduce dependencies on that country. But the second part would also be international competitiveness, which also entails working together with partners in a way to ensure that we have strategic alliances where we can help each other when we cannot address the issue at the EU level alone.
Thank you. And you, Sean?
Oh, mine will be harmonization. I think it's always my favorite words. You come from a regulatory perspective. Harmonize the systems that we use, harmonize the requirements for companies, harmonize the processes for member states and the EU institutions, EMA, etc. Use the Critical Medicines Act to bring things together, because otherwise I don't think we're going to actually be able to truly say that we're tackling shortages if we continue to fragment the system.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Cecilia.
This brings us to the end of this episode of Sounds of Science, the podcast that keeps you informed on the latest policies shaping the European life sciences sector. Thank you for tuning in and following our discussion on medicine shortages. Comments and suggestions are welcome. Please share your views in the comment sections on our LinkedIn or YouTube account, or by mail to office@eucope.org. For more information on EUCOPE's activities, please visit our website and stay tuned for future episodes where we will keep you updated on the evolving European healthcare and pharmaceutical landscape. We are EUCOPE, the trade association representing small and mid-sized innovative companies working in the field of health technologies. I'm Cécile Etevenot, EUCOPE Communications Manager, and I hope you enjoyed this episode.